Welcome to this fireside chat. We're really excited to be talking to IRYS today to learn more about your technology and your mission to provide brokers with solution-oriented BMS and AMS, because that's what you guys call it up there, right?
It is.
Okay. Technology. I met Margot and Max in Calgary at the Trufla Amplify InsurTech conference. So, I had the pleasure of talking to you guys for a bit. I loved Margot, your panel, and your keynote. And yeah, I think I don't, Lindsay, you probably haven't been introduced at all to Goose.
I have not.
Okay, so I am the VP of Customer Success in the Insurance SME at Goose. We are a full service digital marketing company and technology enablement provider and we've had an insurance practice for over 7 years. So we're not an InsurTech, but we help our customers use InsurTech as well as all of the other traditional things that come along with digital marketing. My background was insurance. My family owned brokerages in Canada, and I left the industry in 2012 to pursue this industry with my brother. And here we are 9 years later, and insurance is about 40% of our business.
Wonderful. Couldn't get away from it, could you?
No, like all of us.
She brought us all in, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like all of us, I think, right? It's just, so it's been really good. We work with carriers, we work with brokers, and smaller kind of MGAs in the space, mostly in Canada, US, and a little bit in the UK. So, I'm going to pass it over to Robin, and then I'll kind of chat about why really important to have you guys at the table. So.
Thanks, Jen. Well, it's nice to meet you all. And in full transparency, I knew very little about the insurance industry until about 5.5 years ago when I joined Goose. So it's been an unbelievable learning over this time. My background has always been in marketing technology, but working on the B2C side, so working, hospitality, retail, and then on the B2B, also in fintech, but never quite in insurance. And really my focus prior to coming to Goose, and definitely at Goose, is really around data and reporting and insights. And so what I try to help our clients do, so across all verticals, is really help understand what data do they have, how do they access the data, which has been very interesting learning in insurance, right? Having all that data really locked up. And then how to really leverage that data to gain better understanding of who your existing customers are. Based on that, how do you go ahead and target those specific audiences? And how do you pull all that data together so you can really go ahead and report on performance? So down to really looking at return on investment and return on ad spend. So probably over the last 1.5 years, that return on ad spend and ROI has been an enormous focus of what we've been doing with our insurance brokers. And that's been really, really exciting. Looking for ways to kind of unlock some of the BMSs and AMSs, pull out that data, be really creative of how be able to pull it together and be able to deliver this insight and knowledge to our brokers who've never been able to really connect the dots between what they're doing from a marketing perspective and what they're driving from a revenue perspective. So, I'm so excited to be joining this conversation. Full transparency. Also, when I'm looking at your website and I see words like innovation and integration, so exciting to see that on an InsurTech website.
And following through with it, right? And
not
just putting it
yeah.
points.
Yeah. And that's what I'm so looking forward to hearing more details on that. Absolutely.
Awesome. Do you guys want us to go?
Yeah,
sure.
IRYS team.
Okay, so I'll go first. I am Margot Giles, the CEO of IRYS InsurTech. I too come from the insurance space, so 17 years. Started in the lowly seat of CSR, pushing all the paper back and forth because 17 years ago it was definitely still paper. And worked my way up through the agency, ended up purchasing an agency, and then multiple agencies and growing that. And in that process, really got into operations. So I was behind the scenes a lot, pulling all the levers, creating the workflows, documenting the procedure and process, making sure everybody was doing their job, and then ultimately optimizing process. And that inevitably led me to the tech side. There's only so much optimization you can do with e-faxing and scanning and sticky notes, right? So embarked on a multi-year journey to overhaul our agency's technology, just in general, not just our tech stack, but like how we actually wanted to utilize tech, which is important because I think a lot of times agencies will, or brokerages will see a tech and they're like, that's really cool, that can help, and they'll grab it, but they don't think about holistically from beginning to end the processes that go behind that. And so we made that mistake. We bought a whole bunch of tech, didn't really know how it all was going to work together, but it all looked really cool. And then kind of had to go back and admit defeat and figure out that we actually needed to look at the processes in the business before we actually chose the tech instead of the other way around, which is, I think a lot of people do now. The tech is driving their business process as opposed to the other way around. So did that for many years, and then just organically started getting pulled into other major digital transformations in insurance and became a consultant. Again, not a planned path for me. I really loved insurance and I loved ops and I wanted to stay there, but I had a much larger passion for sharing the failures and successes that I personally had gone through. And so became a consultant, and I met Lindsay at that point in time. And we spent years going and doing the same thing kind of that you guys are discussing doing in the Canadian market here in the US and the UK and a little bit in the Middle East. And just being flies on the wall and learning how massive data moves in big agencies and small agencies, how it moves from agency to carrier and then even into reinsurance, and spent a lot of time doing that. So then probably 2 years ago, between all the proprietary technology that I had built internally for my agencies, plus all of the great knowledge and team that we had built being consultants, we took a look at each other on the executive level and said, are we ready to do this, which is not a small undertaking, which is really go up against very ingrained legacy technology and give people a completely different way of using software and insurance. And the team bought into it. And so we went from a professional services company to a products company, and we have been making that transition ever since. Just had a successful seed round, raised a bunch of money, came into the market as a force to be reckoned with in the BMS, AMS, CRM space. And that is the long journey of how we got here.
Awesome. Thank you. Wild.
Yeah, you can go next, Linz.
So my background is very, very similar to Margot's, which I like to say that we have a lot of shared trauma between the two of us. But same thing, started as an agent, have sat in nearly every seat in an agency, CSR, account manager. I've managed teams, operations. I had the arduous process of training and onboarding new employees into legacy technology, which is horrifying for me as a trainer, and horrifying for them getting to see how we work as insurance agents in general. And then over that process of over 2 decades, have gotten the opportunity to see just about everything technology related, good, bad, and otherwise in that space. Always trying to find new ways to use technology in agencies. And it's a difficult process, but along the way, I met Margot and again, shared trauma. So we bonded almost immediately. And I joined her in the consulting side of things. And it was apparent very quickly to us that while there's a lot of really amazing insurtech going on out there in this ecosystem right now, that there was no one place that all of it could kind of bridge to. And that was the thing that was missing, and that we kept with our clients working towards building all of this proprietary stuff for them, but nobody was still really fixing the thing that needed to be fixed, which how do we build the center of that universe? And that's when we sat down and said, okay, is this it? do we do it?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool.
That's what brought us here. I'm a Chief Product Officer for IRYS, and enjoying really building solutions that our agents need.
Yes. Yeah, need and that act, like you said, actually work.
Yes, because we should all preface that, right? Like, yes, it actually works.
Yeah.
Oh. Max, if you want to go, I know Max is a little under the weather today, but
sorry.
No, that's okay. No, it's okay. It happens. Margot passed it through the phone, but no big deal. What Lindsay was saying, that's what sort of brought me, Margot, and Lindsay together. I was working for another company in the big data space for years. And, last stop was working with insurance agencies, working with carriers, working with brokerages. How do we centralize that data? One stream of information coming in, one stream of information coming out. So it's the maximum usability of the data, no matter what role you're in. And that's what really brought us together, full belief in the platform. It's one of the only ones in the space that is fully open API. And that's what really led me to the team, looking around at several of the other software vendors in the space because of the relationships that I've built, and, really landed at a good home because of how everything is architected, how everything has been thought about. Like Margot said and Lindsay said, they have had their butts in the seat from the CSR, from the producer days, all the way up to operations and ownership. And they've really thought about those critical pieces. So it makes, when I'm going to have conversations with different brokerages, about the BMS systems, they get it.
Yeah.
The thought that's went behind it for years. So it's a pleasure to be in the team, and, really everybody working towards that ecosystem, that central place where everything should live, and making insurance operations as easy as they should be.
Yeah.
Or as Lindsay likes to say, delightful. Because I think that that's something that from a user standpoint, we always kind of get brushed to the side, right? Like, does the database there, enter the data, all we care about is being able to run the analytics, and there has been little to no talk about what that life is like for the user. It's always coming from the perspective of the owner or the management team and what they need out of the system, but never from that first chair and what they need.
Yeah, it's such a fragmented process and or system, even over onto the sales and marketing side, which is really where we live, right? So, and it's not that this epiphany took to amplify for me to have these light bulbs, because we've been struggling with BMS data alongside our customers for 9 years. It's just that it seemed like in September, it was like, well, no wonder the marketing side is so hard. And no wonder it's so difficult to get to an ROI. No wonder every single customer that I talk to has purchased some level of marketing technology or a piece of it that's bolted into something else that they don't even know how to use, right? So along that kind of chain, like, you guys are probably seeing it from a technology perspective and a user perspective on the actual pieces. We're seeing it on a sales and marketing perspective when we're trying to actually go and grow these programs. So it's not that the marketing programs don't work. It's not that, running ads and doing lead generation doesn't work. It's that the visibility, not just the visibility isn't there, it's even creating everything down to smart programs, right? So this is why I really wanted to have you guys at the table today, is because Robin and I find ourselves in these conversations on the sales and marketing side when we're trying to go and build and execute a thoughtful strategy, right? Or even down to the specific use case. But then we're also being brought into these conversations largely in Canada around brokers are really leaning on us as that consultant agency to say, it's time for me to upgrade my BMS, right? What should I'm going from, TAM, whatever, or Power Broker, what should I go to? And my response, which is not a very good one, is a BMS that you could actually, use your own data, see your own data and make use of it, right? Which is not a great answer, right?
Especially if there's not one really to point to. that
Exactly.
really,
Yeah.
like, we know what you need, but we can't give you the vendor because it doesn't yet
Exactly.
exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And-
It
and
doesn't
We have the same problem.
It doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's not the right answer though, because it is the right answer. You should have a system that you can put information into and then make it useful, because otherwise, why bother?
And
Yeah.
that system should not be Excel. That should be an actual
Right.
BMS.
Excel
What do
is
you
not
mean
a
Excel is
database.
wonderful?
Excel's not a system, right? Excel is not a system.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
one of the other commonalities, I think, is that one of the things that we face, or one of the things that we say, is that from a marketing perspective, you always lead with the strategy, and then you have the technology enable. So I think, and Margot, I think you pointed that out, that there's so many of these brokers that are going ahead and purchasing all these insurtechs. That's what's really leading and driving. And then they try and fit the processes or the strategy into that. And that is totally backwards. And that is one of our core philosophies as well. You start with the strategy and you look for the best technology that is going to enable that strategy.
I have a great example of that when I talk to people, to have them sort of understand what we mean by the process. So for me, carrier download is a perfect example of something that makes no sense. Like, this is a flow that we on personal lines in particular, at least here in the US, it's, you go to the rater, you enter the information, it pushes to a bunch of different carrier portals. You do the carrier portal you want to do, you bind the policy, and you wait for the data to come to you from the carrier. And so what we're finding, where all these technologies are coming around to bolster that flow. And Lynn and I both looked at each other and said, that's the stupidest way you would ever want to do that flow. It should start with me, the agent, collecting customer data, because the human is the person who is buying that information. And there's another, what I wrote a note about, talking about, even if you can get the data out, it's not the right data.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's right now the data you need isn't even being captured in the BMS.
Yeah.
But so thinking of, as an agency of any size, you are basically giving up all of your power in that flow, right? Like, you are a recipient of telephone data that has gone through 3 or 4 different versions of it, and you're waiting for it. Why are we doing that? Well, this is because this is the way that we have been told we have to interact with carriers. Well, guess what? Carriers are building API now, and you don't need to interact with carriers in that flow. You can be the first person to collect the data. You can do your own underwriting. You can send that data. You don't have to go through their portal anymore. There are other options. And if we as agents never adjust that flow, and we accept that as the only way that we do business, then we're never going to push the innovation in the direction that we actually need it to. So thinking about that flow in general, when they go out and buy the tech, they're like, well, I need download. And my favorite thing to say is, why? And they're like, well, that's because I need the download. I'm like, well, you need the data, but what if you captured the data first? And because you can't get to all the portals, because carriers only accepting data through their own carrier portal. So, and so there's a whole, like, when you start, Lindsay and I started thinking about how we wanted to build IRYS, we went back to every one of those, what we considered like ingrained, immovable, this is how we have to do this flow. And we started asking why. And we realized that it was all being, the flows were all being dictated by the lack of flexibility in the technology, not in the actual way a person would do business.
Right.
And so that was critical for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just think to myself, and again, I know we always come back to the marketing side of the house because that's what we do. Yeah. But imagine running $10,000 a month on ad spend for key vertical and not being in control of that process.
Well, the data lives in some carrier portal that you may or may never get back.
Right. And your marketing team can't access it. Your marketing team doesn't know where people are dropping off. Your marketing team, that data is very cumbersome to try to get a hold of, right? So then how do you optimize your marketing programs and your spend? And ad spend obviously is just one example, but how do you go and do that if you don't have access to every single touch point, data point, accurate data point along the way?
You can't do it. And one of the things that we talked about early on with IRYS And people like to say we were CRM and a BMS together, and that's true, but we didn't set out to like replace HubSpot, right? Like, but when we looked at what data do we need to be good agents, we needed human data that just happens to overlap with the same kind of data that you would need in a marketing campaign, right? At the beginning, at the top of the funnel. Who is this person? What do they like to do? What are their buying habits? Who do they interact with? Where do they work? Like all of that data is something that is not collected in a BMS. So if you look at a BMS data set, you see account and you see contact, and that contact is a primary contact or a secondary contact or a billing contact. Yeah. And that is the only context you ever get around that person, right? That actual end buyer. Because even in a corporation or in a household, at the end of the day, there is a human buyer that's making that decision behind that type of an entity. And so the whole data structure of legacy was wrong because it didn't allow the human to be the center of the buying process. Right. And for us, that was a huge miss because humans can play many roles, right? Within an agency. They may, and I think I said this on the Verticore podcast that I was just on, when we talk about how legacy looks at people's value, how they're influenced. We talk about marketing, like we want to know this buyer's sort of center of influence to our business. And if the only way you're looking at that influence is linear, so it's human to policy to premium value, right? Yes. This person bought a policy and it was $2,000. And that is the extent of any type of ancillary data that you're getting out of the BMS about what that person does. You miss all the context that, yeah, this person might be a driver on a small personal policy, but they're actually on the board of directors of a large benefits company that we have somewhere else. And so when that person calls in to get service, or, you know, we're trying to connect the dots between what they've actually purchased, it's so fragmented that we can't see anything beyond this very linear view of a client in one vertical within one part of the business. And that is a huge miss. And you'll never be able to, there's not enough data in that 3-point data point, person, policy, premium, to ever train something like an AI or to use any type of machine learning to get at analytics, predictive analytics about that person and what they're going to buy, or how they're going to evolve with your company long time. Like there's so much there that needed to be fixed that Lindsay and I, again, when we were looking at IRYS, we were like, contact can't be the only way we discuss a human and the way that they buy insurance. And we had to go back and fix it. And that completely shattered the data model that anybody's ever seen around insurance structure.
Yeah. I love how you just described that. Oh, I'm sorry, Lindsay.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say, I think that, you know, that then goes into the next thing that we talk about, which is duplication. All of those things that Margot just described are now in your BMS 1,000 times. Right. You know, Margot Giles is in the system 15 different ways because she's a contact, she's a billing person, she's this. And now when folks like you come along and try and do any type of analytics for marketing, the amount of
or even list creation, audience creation, like now we're sending Margot 15 emails about the same thing.
Right. Or you're spending phone calls from Max.
Rubbing through junk data.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's very challenging. Sorry, Robin, even for us, you know, I think one of the things like for our philosophy is we've almost like pushed past some of these data barriers to use what we have. And definitely that's not, you know, that's not like where we need to be continuing to be, but it's served us well to a certain extent, like on a scale of 1 to 5. Okay, we can do a good home and auto cross sell. It's a lot of manual work, tons of manual work, but at least we're doing it versus not doing it, right? But what we've really tried to do is keep our customers away from the level of rigmarole that we go through. So exactly. So we're not sending Jen, oh, you know, here's your auto renewal, here's your home renewal, oh, and then there's the boat renewal, and you've got
and they're getting all these separate emails, and if they're not joined together, oh, that's such a nightmare.
That's because you're a human being, and that's why the way that this conversation about, in the technology right now, there's a contact. I mean, which is not a person, right? So it's this dehumanizing, really, really antiseptic view, but that's not what insurance is at all. It's about relationships. It's about risk management. It's about advice. It's the polar opposite. But when you have technology platforms that treats an individual as a contact versus as somebody who has multiple different needs, has multiple different interests, likes to be engaged with in a certain way, that's a totally different way of looking at your customer, your prospect, a different way of how you can add value to them. And it really is turning the tables. And you can't turn the tables with the technology platforms the way they are, because they're not turnable, right? They're so inflexible that you have to say, I need to look at my customers as human beings. So in order to do that, so that I understand that they are, they're not 5 different Lindsays, they're actually one Lindsay who only needs one phone call from Max, where Max can talk about how to help from a home policy, from a boat policy, from a cottage. That's the human perspective, and that's the value proposition.
Getting that phone call, and it's happened to me. This is what sparked it on in our own agencies. It was like, hey, like you said, your home renewal's up, and I'm like, well, what about, I need a work comp. I started this new LLC, this consulting firm. I need to make sure I got some comp. And they're like, well, I can't help you with that. I'll have to have someone else call you back. And then you have to do another intake. So when and that's okay, because we need transfer. We got different departments. I'm fine with that. But then I get to that other department and it's like, what's your name? And I'm like, really? We have to do another, here's another, by the way, here's 3 pages of supplementals and accords you need to fill out. And I'm like, you have this information. Like,
exactly. There's no understanding of relationship there.
Yeah.
You know me, you know so many things about you.
You know everything about me.
Exactly. Why am I getting this whole cold conversation? Right. And people don't like that.
Well, right? And it's funny. Yeah. And sorry, Rob, it's funny because we all grew up, some of us grew up in brokerages, and what does everyone always say? And I'm going to say this on record, I hear it every day. We're a relationship business, Jen. Yep. We're a relationship business, Jen. That email is a bit cold. It's like, I know, you know what I mean? So there's that double, well,
they want to be, I think on an individual level. So what we're seeing is we have these great producers, and a lot of them are older. They're reaching retirement age now. Okay. And that data, all that, what we're talking about, lives in their brain. Yes. They know it. They know that it's one Lindsay with 5 things, because it's their job to know, because that's how they derive income, right? Yeah. For making people have these really strong relationships. But those people are, one, retiring and leaving, or just in general, like moving on to different positions. And we have no way of transferring that knowledge to the next generation of insurance, because the software is not enabled to do that. And so what do we get? We get, a new rep comes in, and I have it in my agencies all the time, because my mom is 62. She's like our lead commercial agent. She knows everybody. She knows everybody's kids, their neighbors, about everyone. And, they will only want to talk to her. Like, we have a problem because she's only one person. She knows all, and they're like, nope, I only want to talk to Melissa. And we're like, well, how about this person? They're like, nope. And because there's no way for the important Melissa information to get to that next handoff, even if it's not a new employee, but just somebody in a different department, right? Yeah. So then she ends up having to do that work because she owns the relationship. But at the end of the day, the agency should own the relationship, right? And everybody should be working towards bettering the relationship. And so we had to figure out a way in a data model to represent that correctly, so that information could be shared. And it just required us to completely rethink the way that it was done prior.
And it's not only relationships with our customers as agents, but it's relationships with our markets, with the carriers, because, that's very important. I can get something written with one carrier versus another because of those relationships that I have. Right. They all need to be represented the same way. And there was just no way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe Margot, you were telling me about this. I think this part of it at the show. So maybe I don't know, Lindsay or Margot, can you guys talk about how you, what you know, how you built that data structure around that relationship to have that total visibility?
Yeah, I mean, really, it just started with uniquely identifying the human at the first level. So instead of going right into the corporation or to the household and starting there and trying to find a contact there, working backwards, it was, how do I get to know this human? And again, it alters a workflow, because instead of going right in and asking them for their mailing address, like it's more of like a conversation. Okay, give me your name, your phone number, you know, what are you affiliated with any businesses? Do you have any, like, it's really more of like what Max, I mean, as a good salesperson, you're discovering about the person first, right? And then figuring out what we're going to sell them, because most likely, you know, like even a homeowner knows somebody else who owns a small business, right? And small business owners are typically know other small business owners and different associates. So like if you start at the end of the sale where you're calling them because they're looking for an auto quote, you're missing the rest of the picture. And so we had to initially go back and say, okay, we had to start with the person and not with the policy or the opportunity. So most people will go in and start with that opportunity. We started with the person. And then everything above that is relationships, and people have different personas and they can wear different hats. And so for us, we use the idea of personas in our data to kind of show that, yeah, Margot is Margot, right? And she has some very data points that are very static to Margot, you know, and then there's all the roles she plays in the rest of her life. She's a mother, she's on the board, she's a driver of a car. Like these are all personas for us. And so there's a secondary level underneath our static level of persona and relationship and participation in different things. So we had to make the data model extremely flexible so that humans can participate in businesses, businesses can participate in other businesses, they all can participate in opportunities and policies, and so on. And so can vehicles, and so can locations and exposure. So we had to really figure out I think of it, and the reason why we ended up with the visual that you guys see of IRYS, which is really this web, this UI that's never been seen before, this sort of mind mapping, right? Because that's really what it is at the end of the day. We're not selling a t-shirt or a widget. We're selling a promise. We're selling a contract, and a contract isn't as tangible as those things. And so, and that contract is made up of many parts, and there's broadening and exclusions, and each contract is slightly different. And if you start looking at what we're actually selling, it didn't make sense to have systems that look more like e-commerce type systems representing the transaction. And so a lot of that for us, it just came down to, we have 1,000 pieces of a puzzle that can be put together 1,000 different ways. And so how do we represent the data in the connection instead of representing it hard-coded in a thing, like an object? So that's like
I love it. Yeah. I love the persona aspect. I think like that is just mind-blowing and correct.
It's how you do it in real life.
It is, and it allows you to explore. Now that you have that kind of architecture in place, it allows you to explore more than anything that you thought you traditionally could. So if Max is doing his job as a good salesperson, which he does, he's going to take all of those data points, and now I can see, like, how did I get this phone call in the first place? Was it a referral from somebody else? Okay, now I have that connection. I can thank them for the referral, but also say, you may be a great referral partner for me. Who else can you recommend me to? So that web just continues growing, which makes your job as a salesperson and an organization much easier to get new revenue, but then also track where all of it came from.
But it also gives you a reason to put the data in the thing in the first place.
Yes.
As salespeople, I did it for many years. Let me tell you guys, like, I'm the worst. I will not, like, I'll put it in if I have to, and you're getting bare minimum in CRM, right? Because there's no tangible outcome for me other than to track. It's always a historical, but as a salesperson, now we're saying to them, listen, the more you put into IRYS, the better, the more when you wake up in the morning, the more insight, the more leads you're going to have. And these are not leads that you're buying from a list or coming in cold off of a click web form that 1,000 other people have clicked on. these are like really intimate referrals. They're 1 to 2 to 3 levels of connection to somebody that already buys from you, that you already have a really good relationship with. And so this idea that you can grow organically, like I have seen so many books of business, right? Like, and expected books of business when we're buying agencies and we want to look at like, the value of an agency. And one of the things I look for is like, monoline versus package. Like, are they really rounding out the book of business that they already have? Because if you're not doing that, then there's no reason you need to go. Don't spend $10,000 a month on Google ads. Spend it
exactly. Start there.
start where you already have the business.
Yeah.
And again, when we went, we're like, that's how we build the agency. And we did before IRYS. It was spreadsheet based. We were trying to keep track of this in old technology. It was really difficult to do it, and it was hard to connect the data points. And so when we went to build IRYS, we're like, we really have to focus on that internal growth, because we're looking at, as a CEO, I'm looking still at marketing trends for IRYS myself. I'm looking at where we spend, and internally we use IRYS to map our own customers and their journey and understand their center of influence as well, right? Because it's so critical to the business in general. I'm not going to spend, like I said, $10,000 on paid ads when I've got a web of an agency that already is in IRYS, that is in an association that then could help us get more IRYS. Like it's self-perpetuating, and it's something that I think is wholly unique to us at this time.
Yeah. And I think, Robin and I work with tons of paid media, and I do think it gets a bad rep from and I agree with you, like low hanging fruit, like, especially for these small brokers, like, low hanging fruit.
A lot of them just have never done it.
They've never
gone after the low hanging fruit. They're trying to go after the hard stuff, and they've never even gone.
They've never even gone to that. And like you said, it's a workflow thing. It's a people thing. And I think it's a how do you go and do that, even if you want to incorporate digital marketing mediums into that. And back to the paid ads, I think like it does get a bad rep, because that visibility and that structure and what it actually takes to go and to do a return on investment, particularly for brokers, because they're only getting a portion of the gross written premium. So that whole model of actually, okay, what does it take to go and get a return on net new business, as well as, what does the strategy look like to go and round out your book of business, right?
Well, net new, like going net new from IRYS is still like, because we can identify 3 to 4 levels of connection, right? So it's still net new business, because you contacted this referral source, and now their neighbor is somebody that you know, like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's just a different way to look at that. But then I think I see it evolving in digital marketing so that you can be better specific target, not doing this spaghetti against the wall with your paid ads or your Facebook ads, but you've curated now, with the help of this relational sort of database that you've created, these very specific, very intentional targets that now really return ROI, because you guys know the more drilled in that is, the better the return.
And the less budget we have to spend.
Yeah, you don't
so
have to
now
spend
you're going to see this totally flip on its head. You're going to see that if a broker has $1,500 a month and that's all they have, great. Let's get super niche, right, with accurate data, right? And that I have seen, we've already started to see a shift in the level of, being able to stretch budgets. But I think that's really gonna bring it down. Lindsay.
I think of the conversations that we're involved with, that when we do talk about, we talk about this is the strategy. So even if it's uncovered that, there might be this low hanging fruit, and let's go ahead and look for additional value from our existing customers, look for those opportunities. And very often the next stage in that discussion is, okay, well, let's take a look at your data, right? Do we have the data available so we can go ahead and understand what opportunities do we have? Where is the opportunities? How do we go ahead and go about really driving that value? And then you uncover the fact that, we didn't think about this before, so we never really enforced for our sales team that it's really critical that the type of data that you're capturing, how you're entering the data into your system, with the understanding that this is how we're going to need to look at it. We're going to need this mind map so we can look and identify which of our customers do we only have one coverage but not the other. So the monoline.
I thought there's a good example of that. And I won't name any names. I was talking to a really large carrier and we were talking about that, like, okay, let's do this. And what data set do you have? And we needed insured email. Okay,
Right.
like that was the field we needed. We needed the insured's email address.
Yeah.
They didn't have it.
Yeah, I know.
Anywhere in the system. Now they had a primary contact email, like we talked about, right? Like there was a random email that someone put on a contact that was related to the account that held the policy. But there was no concept of the insured, primary insured, their contact information. And again, it's right to your point is we want to market a coverage to this primary insured. And you're like, great, what's their email? And they're like,
yeah, we don't know.
We have an email, but we don't even know if this belongs to that persona, because that's really what it is, this person's persona. And so now, like you said, if you're going to spend a whole bunch of money targeting, you want to get targeted with this particular insured's coverage set, you can't do that because you don't even have a way to contact that person in that role.
Yep.
That's bad.
We deal with that on a constant basis. And it's and something you touched on, I think, was really interesting around people first. I think that what I get excited about some of the things you said, at Amplify and in this today is that it's really going to change the paradigm. And I think for younger people coming into this industry, hopefully, that they're going to be excited about this level of technologies, sales enablement kind of, methodologies. They don't want it living in their head. They don't even operate that way. I mean, we hire people, I just even think of the last string of people that we hired, and I am just I feel like a dinosaur. I'm looking at all the tools that these people are using, and I'm thinking, how long did this take you? Oh, well, 15 minutes in this tool. I just sent you a link so you have access to it. I'm just thinking to myself, this is what they want, right? So
expectation.
Yeah. So I think that's really cool.
Think of, like, as a whole, the insurance industry, right? Like if you were, I'm sure, and I want to look up the numbers, but like, I'm sure if you polled the average aged, Canadian or United States citizen about how they feel about insurance companies, because they don't know the difference between a broker and a carrier and an MGA, that you're all insurance, okay, to the layman, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that you would be surprised to hear that they don't feel like a human when they're interacting with their service and their sales teams, that it feels like a necessary evil that they have to have. It's not something they would choose. They wouldn't describe the interaction as delightful. So in general, we have a whole bunch of reluctant buyers that are forced, for lack of a better way to say it, to buy our product. And because they're forced to buy our product, we've all decided, and we all have to take responsibility for it as an industry, that their experience and how they feel about buying it doesn't really matter. You have to buy it. So if you want it, take it, and that I don't think is going to serve us well in the future. And so I think the agencies and brokerages and carriers that can take that human-centric sort of approach, and they can actually put that into process, and that people can feel that, I think you're going to see an entirely different way people want to interact with insurance companies. And again, we can't let the fact that the technology doesn't allow them to be treated like humans, and we can't use that excuse anymore, because it's 2023. Like, you can, but you have to want, as a company, you have to want to operate from that place, and then put your money where your mouth is and actually make the changes necessary to operate from that place.
It's tough. And I feel, I'm sure you guys are seeing this over there too. I feel very sad for the industry and the investments that they've made in technology to then turn around and find out, and this, you know, we're very passionate about this, to turn around and find out that, oh, said 5 use cases that they thought they were going to be able to implement, you know, to grow their business or gain more efficiencies, they're not possible, right? Or are not what they thought it was going to be. And I mean, it's like every second conversation I have, right? So there's also this fear, and I think it's so important for, you know, people like us to come together that are helping, really actually helping. You know, there's, as you guys know, major money going around, and, you know, we are, you know, Goose does support several best of breed marketing technology companies, but even then we lead with strategy first, people first, right? So that we're not coming in with another piece of technology that, let's be honest, unless you're going to use it right, it's just going to be another expensive tech sitting on the shelf that nobody's using, right?
That's why we've been so passionate about the broker space, because we've always been the red-headed stepchildren. I mean, just to be completely clear, we're not necessarily where all the money is spent, and nobody really cares, even though we're the ones that are bringing the consumers to the insurance carriers. So we're still a very important part in that process, and that's not going away anytime soon. But the gap in technology that exists out there in the world in general versus what we use as an industry is growing wider every single day. And we struggle with that. And that's, again, why we're so passionate about it, because it can't continue. We won't be able to backfill these positions that are being left by people retiring or moving industries. They won't come back. We won't be able to get anybody new, because they'll take one look at it and say, absolutely not. And then our consumers are demanding more and more every day, which just puts more onus on the service staff to maintain and keep up with service standards that are kind of spiraling out of control, because the technology won't allow them to work within the time constraints that we're being expected of us these days. It's really hard. So we have to do something. Somebody has to do something. So it may as well.
Somebody has to do it.
Yeah, I agree. So what do you guys, I mean, obviously, I think we kind of touched on, you know, what drives your passion. I think, you know, we share in that mutual passion, but where do you guys see the next year? Like, what do you see 2024 looking like? What do you see? Yeah, well, how do you see the next, you know, couple of years in the broker space evolving around the BMS technology?
I think we've seen already, I feel like there's this, I don't know if it's technology created, but there's this chasm between the retail distribution and the carrier.
Yes.
And we all kind of point fingers back to each other, like, well, they don't, you know, they're cutting our commissions and they're making more demands, and the carriers are like, you know, they're sending us crap risk and they're like, right? So there's like a lot of finger pointing. What I realized, though, when we kind of went on this journey, is that we're being approached by carriers. They really do care. They really do want a better exchange between us and them.
100%.
And so they, like, not everybody, and I think that old school sort of idea of carrier owns everything and agents this kind of there to be the beck and call, that feels like it's phased out, because there's a lot of people that are coming into the carrier space that are tech forward, that are also kind of like, why are we forcing these agents to send us paper applications, right? Or why are we transferring data through email with attachments like that? It's not feasible. So we've seen a lot of carriers that have come to us and said, hey, like, how can we make this better? And they have budget behind it, and they have desire to do it. And I think in years past, people have been building the technology kind of not knowing why or where, like the strategy behind the build, even at the highest level, was lacking. Like, I always joke that at a conference, we got a guy said, I know I need API, but I don't know what it is. And so I think we had a lot of people that, like, especially even on the carrier side, like, okay, we're going to build API. And everybody started building in their own silos, and there was never any discussion as an industry for standardization or or what are we building, or what's most important to the agent, which is why we ended up with customer portals or agent portals, which if you stop for 1 minute and thought about how a user was going to utilize your portal, it makes no sense. I have 146 carrier appointments between my agencies. I have 146 portals to log into. Like,
I know.
there's
this is why I left the industry. This is why I left the industry in 2012. I basically said, I'm out, my family. I'm just kidding.
Exactly. But if, so that's a great example of people building in silo. Like inside that carrier, it made perfect sense. Well, if we give them an access point, then they can do whatever they want, right? But that only made sense for one side of the equation, because there was never a consideration for how a customer or an agent or whoever, anybody would go from the beginning of the thing to the end of the thing, knowing that we're touching many stakeholders, reinsurance and carrier and underwriting and claims and TPAs and accounting. Like, no one ever sat down and said, what is the flow? Like, what is the overall thing that we're trying to solve? And let's build towards something that's greater than this very specific use case. And I think people spend billions of dollars doing this, and now they're like, why isn't this working? And so now they're I think we're in 2023 and 2024, the mad dash to spend on tech without a strategy is over. I think everybody's burnt out on that, but I think now they're going back and evaluating the want and the why we decided to build is still there. We still need it. It's still valuable to us, but we have to be much more strategic on what we build and how we interact with other stakeholders in the value chain. So that would be my prediction for 24, a lot more of that.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too again, back to the marketing side of the house. I agree. We're hearing far more conversations in the last 1.5 to 2 years around, even something a little, more simple in the sense of, let's grow together. We work with the carriers on broker marketing, and let's align on that key appetite. Let's actually create marketing programs together that are going and driving the type of business that we both want, right?
That is so huge. Right? Getting not just the sales rep either, but like really diving in on these agencies that, a lot of them will have a bunch of appointments, but they really have 2, 3, 4 main, carrier partners that they're truly funneling business to. And that is a great example of doing something holistically, like getting those people in a room and saying, we want to increase sales. Where would this be helpful for you, partner? And then what can we do to facilitate it? There are much more of those conversations happening. I think you're 100% correct.
Exactly. And then Robin can speak to this, but a lot of the things that she works on in that kind of triangle is showing the return on investment by carrier. Right. Mm-hmm. So that, and, bringing in the lifetime value so that we know on said piece of new business, even if it's a rounding out of a book or a cross-sell upsell, or it's a net new piece of business to the agency, then it's also around looking at how long have we had that, how long do we can predict that we're going to have this piece of business over periods of time. Right. And so then your ROI is starting to make a lot more sense, right?
Yeah, you're really
a lot of times. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what you're able to do then is you're able to provide additional value and insights.
Yes.
And these are things that are not just valuable to the broker, but to the carrier as well. And it's, maybe 50 years ago, that kind of thing would have lived totally in one person's head, and maybe maybe your mom knows all of that, but as you expand, as businesses as they get larger, you can't possibly have all of that information in your head. So you need to have that in the platform that you can go ahead and say, a broker can have a conversation with the carrier saying, look, this is how much we've invested to drive business for you. This is good business. This is, business that you want and that we want. Let's work together to drive more of that business. And we have the data to be able to say, we know what was successful at driving that particular business. That's great. Let's work together to do that. And that's a win-win for both sides.
Well, and brokers, that was exactly what I was going to say, is a lot of times we talk about, the carrier driving the appetite to the agent. But what people don't realize, especially when you get into agencies of any significant size, we are the first line underwriters. And this is particularly true in commercial lines. There have been many times in my career where I have gone to a carrier and said, listen, I write this niche business, right? I haven't had a loss in 5 years in this line. Like, you need to open up this market. Let me show you why. Let me give you the data as to why you should write this business, right? And I think most agency owners, because it's probably something that happens more at the owner or manager level, we're used to just getting slapped down. No thanks. We got actuaries that deal with that, or we've got our own predictive analytics, and they're not taking into account that you might be you're on the boots in the ground. It's like, I've got 5,000 of these policies, right? And I don't want them with one carrier. I want to diversify my risk, right? But there's only one carrier that's writing this in this business in this area. So that's who we have to go to. And we have been on the receiving end of all the tide turning. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there when you talk about cross-sell, upsell, book roll. Okay, we don't write that class code anymore. So now you have to take 5,000 policies and you have 30 days to move them, right?
Yeah.
Like, these are the, and like, imagine being able to basically go to these carriers with data that they don't even have yet and truly present to them, like, you're helping them discover new, really good niche business. Like, carriers also need to be receptive to that. I think that we get kind of pushed under the overall sentiment is that we'll write anything for $1, right? And that might be true for small personal, and that may be true for highly transactional, super small, but when we're writing large oil and gas, especially in Canada, or trucking or manufacturing, and we're doing the underwriting on that, we're putting our E&O on the line. No one's like hawking that over the fence and lying about dealing with hazardous material. You know what I mean? We as agents and brokerage, like, we have a unique amount of data and a unique perspective that carriers are never going to have access to. And I think that is an interesting play that I think most carriers are starting to pay attention.
I think some of the conversations we've also been having with carriers over the past few months in terms of supporting agents have been not only how do we drive more new business to get that new revenue, but how do we support them over the life cycle of those policies to in turn drive more revenue? Because it's great if you can get a piece of new business written quickly, but if support falls off the planet after that and you're left to your own devices and you can't get endorsements for 6 months, then at renewal you're probably replacing that business. So how do we make that easier? Because that's where all the service work comes into play, and I think they're willing to start working with us in that area too, which is very intriguing.
Very exciting.
And okay, so future without AI, like, we have to, it's like obligatory. We have to say it's going to be about
well, actually, and I know we're kind of at time, but we are at time, but I did want to ask that, is that how do you see AI coming into this with how you structured your data? I mean, I think it's going to be easier, but do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, real quickly, it's, because it's not necessarily a quick topic, but I think what happened is, we got a mad rush for AI tech buys, right? We had a bunch of people that went out and bought, API'd in ChatGPT and tried to train their own bots, and they quickly realized that your AI is only as good as your data set, and that all of a sudden we've seen an acceleration on data structure and cleanliness of data and the integrity of data, because AI is completely fueling that. And so I think it made it really important to a lot of people really fast about how people were entering the data, what data was actually in there, because you cannot utilize AI effectively if you're just throwing garbage at it all day long.
Right. Yep. You're not going to train it. It's not going to be, it's going to be all messed up. Obviously, what you get back is not going to be good.
It's got bias just like anything else. If you feed it bad data, it's going to spit bad analytics out. I mean, and there's a whole lot of bad data out there right now.
Yeah, and it's going to then not be able to deliver on the promise of AI that people are not scared about, right? So it's not, that fear of people losing their jobs. Actually, no, the promise of AI is to help optimize what you're doing, discover additional opportunities with less repetitive manual tasks, where you're actually leveraging humans, back to the human point, humans where they actually excel, having that personal conversation, building that relationship, but it's supported by that AI, so that if you are having an agent speak to a customer, oh no, we can have a conversation that's personalized because we have AI has combed through the data and has actually come up with a recommendation of additional coverage or something that's missing, but in a really personalized way that brings the human touch back in.
And you're going to be able to tell. So I think looking forward like 5 years, the difference between a company that's going to effectively implement AI and one that is not going to be 20-30% difference, right? It's going to be exponential. And I think, you know, if I was a really large brokerage, I would be night and day trying to figure out how to effectively leverage AI, because there'll be agencies that are a third of the size that will point that Death Star at that book from that large agency, and they will take it. And it's not going to be merger and acquisition anymore. It's going to be, I'll just steal your clients.
Yeah,
because I'm going to be better and more effective at it, and I don't need to buy anymore.
Yeah.
So like they're like, that is that's the scary part of AI, right? Like I think it's going to level the playing field. Yes. Because of it used to be manpower and upfront capital, right? That could manage that big book of business. It's not going to be that anymore. It's going to be effective use of data. That's going to be how they win it.
Yeah. So brokers won't need to worry so much about having their customer logos or case studies on their website anymore, because that'll be the least of the worries.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So awesome. Well, thank you guys. Is there anything else you want to kind of leave the Canadian broker audience with?
No, I just want to say that I'm very excited. I love you, Max, but I'm so excited that there's 4 women on this podcast, all talking not just about insurance, but technology. So I
came here to take notes and listen.
Yeah. Sorry, Max. But yeah, I always point that in podcasts. Like I'm so thrilled to see so many more women stepping up to the plate and taking on the tech role in particular in insurance.
Yeah, me too. I mean, when I listened to your women's panel, I was very inspired. I think you guys are all rock stars. So yeah, very inspired by your story. It was awesome.
Let's bring more in.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, so I think I'm going to get this all out to definitely our broker channel. Thank you for coming in and sharing with us. I mean, we could probably talk for hours, right? Fun. So
super awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.